Monroe County, Alabama. It's a place that wears its history on its sleeve, if you know where to look. This is where Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, grew up and based her famous novel on the courthouse in Monroeville. You can feel the weight of history in the old buildings, the worn-out roads, and the thick forests that seem to hold on to secrets like the air holds on to the humidity. But there's more to this place than what's written in history books. There's a darkness here, something that's been lurking long before the first settlers arrived. The locals in Monroe County will tell you stories if you press them. Stories about things that move in the woods, about strange lights along the Alabama River, and about the disappearances that no one talks about too much. The local paper doesn't print those kinds of things often, but every now and then you'll find a brief mention. A cow found mutilated on a farm, hunters who go missing and never come back, families who see things in the night they can't explain. That's where I come in. When Nightwatch sent me to investigate, they didn't give me much to go on. They never do. Unexplained phenomena near the Alabama River, livestock mutilations, missing persons. Handle it. It sounded routine at first, but the more I learned about this place, the more I realized that nothing here is ever routine. I arrived in Monroe County just after dawn. Driving south from Monroeville toward the Alabama River, the road cuts through dense woods, and the humidity was thick even that early. I passed through the outskirts of Claiborne, or what was left of it. Back in the 19th century, Clayborne was a bustling steamboat town, one of the most important river ports in Alabama. It sat right on the banks of the Alabama River, thriving during the early 1800s when steamboats were the lifeblood of commerce. But when the railroad came through, Claiborne started to die off. Now, it's just a ghost town. Broken down buildings overtaken by vines, old streets that lead nowhere, and a graveyard of memories. The kind of place where something could hide for a long time. As I headed south, I passed under the shadow of some of the oldest trees I'd ever seen. Goliaths that have been standing long before the first settlers ever came to Alabama. It's easy to get lost out here. The woods are thick, almost claustrophobic, and the Alabama River snakes through it like a dark ribbon, winding its way through history. The river itself is full of stories. Battles fought, lives lost, trade routes long forgotten. But what interested me wasn't on the river. It was in the woods. My destination was an old farmstead about 5 miles off County Road 39, near where the river bends. The land had been abandoned for years. The owner, a man named Samuel Barnes, disappeared about a decade ago. Some say he ran off, others claim he went mad and drowned himself in the river. The truth no one knows. But the stories started picking up after he disappeared. Strange sounds, mutilated animals, lights in the woods at night. I made camp just outside the old farm, near the edge of the woods. From there I had a good view of the Alabama River, its dark water moving slowly like it had all the time in the world. There's something about that river. It feels ancient, like it's seen things that humans weren't meant to see. That first night was eerie. The air was thick with the kind of humidity that clings to your skin, and the only sound was the faint rustling of the leaves in the breeze. I sat by my fire, staring into the darkness, waiting. You learn to wait in this job. You learn to listen to what the forest isn't saying. And that's what struck me first. The silence. No insects buzzing, no frogs croaking in the distance, just silence. I've learned over the years that when the woods go quiet, it's because something is out there, something that doesn't belong. It was around midnight when I heard it, the low guttural growl coming from the trees. I grabbed my rifle and scanned the tree line, but I couldn't see anything. The fire cast just enough light to make the shadows dance, and for a moment I thought it might have been my imagination. But then I saw it. Movement, just beyond the light of the fire. I didn't get a good look at it, but I could tell it was big. Too big to be a deer, and too silent to be anything natural. It was watching me. That much I knew. I could feel its eyes on me, studying me. waiting for me to make a move. But I didn't. I held my ground and waited. That's the thing about cryptids. They're smart, sometimes smarter than we give them credit for. They know when they've been seen, and they know how to disappear. That night, whatever it was, disappeared back into the woods. But I knew it would be back. The next morning, I headed into Monroeville to get a feel for the area. This place isn't big on outsiders, and I could tell by the way people watched me that they knew I didn't belong. But Monroeville has history, more than just Harper Lee's. It was a town shaped by the Civil War, Reconstruction, and a long legacy of farming, the kind of place where traditions run deep. But there's also a layer of unspoken fear here, the kind of fear that people carry with them but don't talk about. I stopped by to see if there were any reports of the strange occurrences I was here to investigate. They were tight-lipped at first, but with a little prodding, the editor let me look at some old files. Sure enough, there were a few stories buried in the back pages. Reports of livestock mutilations near the river, odd lights seen in the woods, and, of course, the missing people. Hunters mostly, whose trucks were found abandoned along the riverbank, but their bodies were never recovered. No one ever found a trace. But the story that caught my attention was about Samuel Barnes. His disappearance wasn't the first in that area. There had been reports going back decades of people going missing near the river, all in the same stretch of woods where you'd set up camp. Something was drawing them in, and none of them ever came back. The second night, hiding in the shadows. That night I knew I had to be ready. I'd seen enough during the first night to know that whatever was out there was dangerous and smart. I set a trap, left some bait near the tree line, and set up a blind a few yards away. I'd be waiting for it this time, not the other way around. I crouched low in the shadows, my body hidden beneath camouflage netting. The air was thick, and the mosquitoes buzzed around me, but I didn't move. I'd been in worse conditions before. The trick was to stay still, stay focused. My rifle was cradled in my arms, my finger light on the trigger. It's funny how, in moments like that, your mind sharpens. Every sound, every movement, everything becomes amplified. I waited for hours, watching the bait, waiting for the creature to show itself. The fire in my camp had burned low, just embers glowing in the distance. And then I heard it again, the growl, low, guttural, vibrating through the trees. It was close, closer than I'd expected. My heart pounded, but I didn't move. Not yet. I scanned the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A shimmer in the air, like heat rising off pavement. It was cloaked, just like before, bending light around itself, making it nearly invisible, but not completely. I could still track its movements, the slight distortion in the air as it moved toward the bait. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, moving with a grace that something that size shouldn't have. My finger tightened on the trigger. I had the shot lined up. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fear, but I didn't fire. The shift into another world. In that moment of hesitation, everything changed. The air around me seemed to warp, bending like it was being pulled in 2 different directions. The temperature dropped, and the forest around me grew blurry, like I was seeing it through a fogged window. I tried to move, but it was like the world itself was slowing down. And then, I wasn't in the woods anymore. I don't know how to explain it, but the landscape had changed. The trees were twisted, their branches gnarled like claws reaching out from the earth. The Alabama River was still there, but it was darker, more foreboding, like the water was thicker, slower, filled with something I couldn't see. The sky above wasn't night, but it wasn't day either. It was an endless void of swirling dark clouds moving slowly, silently. And then I saw them. Not just one, but 3. The Bigfoot creatures were there, standing in the distance, watching me. They weren't cloaked anymore. Their fur was dark and matted, their bodies massive. But what struck me most was their eyes. They were glowing faintly in the strange light, watching me with an intelligence I hadn't expected. They weren't just animals. These things were something else, something more. I don't know how long I was in that place, but it felt like time had stopped. My thoughts were slipping away from me, like I couldn't hold on to them. I knew I had to get out, but I didn't know how. The creatures didn't move toward me, didn't attack, they just watched. It was like they were waiting for me to make the first move, but I didn't. I stood my ground. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, I was back in the woods. The temperature returned to normal, and the fire was burning low again. But the creatures were gone. Whatever I had just experienced, it wasn't a dream, it wasn't my imagination. I had crossed into something else, something beyond our world. The Final Showdown, Hunting the Hunters. After that night, I knew I couldn't leave without finishing the job. These creatures weren't just stalking the woods. They were playing with reality itself. I couldn't let them keep doing that. So, the next night, I set my final trap. I moved deeper into the woods, leaving more bait, and I waited. This time when they came, I was ready. They moved like shadows, fast and silent, but I had the advantage. I knew their game now. I fired the first shot, and the lead creature roared, the cloak dropping as the bullet struck it. The others charged, their eyes glowing in the darkness, but I didn't panic. I held my ground, fired again, and one by one they fell. It wasn't easy. These things were smart, and they fought like they had nothing to lose. But in the end, I stood over their bodies, the woods silent once again. The Alabama River flowed quietly beside me as if nothing had ever happened. The aftermath. Unsettled truths. I buried the bodies deep in the woods. No one would ever find them, and Nightwatch would never ask. But as I finished the last grave, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't really over. I had crossed into their world, if only for a moment, and I knew that whatever they weren't just gone. They were waiting, watching. I left Monroe County the next day, but even now, as I sit here recounting the story, I can still feel the weight of their eyes on me. Some things in this world don't stay buried. Not in Monroe County, not anywhere.
If you've made it this far, you know there's more out there than meets the eye. Stories like this one are just the beginning. If you want to hear more about Jake's encounters with the unknown, don't forget to like this video, share it with those who aren't afraid to look into the dark, and subscribe for more. Stay tuned. There's always something lurking in the shadows, and Jacob Hennessy be there to bring it to light.